pill. Orange pill. Orange pill.
It's good for you, good for you, good for you.
Trick or treat.
Yeah, baby. Hope you're getting a lot of candy out there. What's your favorite trick or treat candy?
I always liked Reese's peanut butter cups.
Oh, really? Okay. That's good too. That's a good one. Yeah, that's a winner.
This is my Day of the Dead shirt here.
Cool.
I got this in Mexico City the last time we were there, and locally made. And we've got to obviously get some of the sort of Mexican crypto art happening of Max Kaiser on the face with his skull. I like that. But, you know, Max, because it's the Day of the Dead, I've got some spooky news for you.
Okay. Hit me with the spooky news. Hit me. Hit me.
Can lab-grown brains become conscious? A handful of experiments are raising questions about whether clumps of cells and disembodied brains could be sentient and how scientists would know if they were.
Right. Yeah. So this is, part and parcel with a lot that's coming out now about brain research. I saw that story. I saw another story about scientists were able to send thoughts from one brain to a connected second brain, right? So like they're creating a neural network, and they're just distinct thought, like, oh, the car is red. This thought is then sent to another brain. I saw another story where scientists had isolated through incredibly powerful microscopes and bioscopes, et cetera. They were mapping, or they're showing in real time in video a memory being created in the brain, the synaptic machinations of what's going on in your neurological cosmic self when a memory is created in your brain. And so this, the brain was kind of like the last frontier. We've explored space. We haven't really explored the oceans too much, but, we have done a fair amount of ocean exploration. We circumnavigated the globe. We've sent probes out of the solar system. But the brain was always like this undiscovered continent that's now being really discovered and mapped and explored. And this idea of essentially having growing brains in a petri dish, growing brains in the lab, and then having a discussion about whether it's conscious or not. I mean, it dovetails into a whole conversation about artificial intelligence. I mean, artificial intelligence exists presumably in a computer network and algorithmically driven. And so if this massive organic material in a petri dish is mimicking a neural network, then you would suppose you could download the artificial intelligence into this. And then there's a whole question about what is intelligence? What is consciousness? Are we now on the doorstep of the hologram, of the simulation? Is this the the reckoning that we've been talking about, that day when we become one with the technology? So all these stories, the singularity, all these stories are now coming together.
Yeah, and this is what Orange Pill has been covering, like this notion of consciousness. And the first sentence of this article that you had sent me, and so, can lab-grown brains become conscious? In Alison Moutry's laboratory, hundreds of miniature human brains, the size of sesame seeds, float in petri dishes, sparkling with electrical activity. Here's a photo of these little sesame seed size human brains floating in a petri dish. And I guess they did detect some electrical currents in a network effect happening over a few days or weeks or even hours. I don't know how long it was, but the point is that they immediately destroyed the cells because once they realized that that might be consciousness, what they were detecting, and what are the ethics then of like killing it or keeping it alive, and are you supposed to nurture it? Do you read it books? And since the ancient Greeks, these are questions we've been asking ourselves, right? Of like, who are we? What are we? Are we just this flesh? What is this? What are these thoughts we have? Descartes, and I think, therefore I am. That is consciousness he was talking about. I have consciousness, therefore I am.
Right. The sesame seed size, possibly sentient artificial brain material. We shouldn't be put off by that phrase sesame seed size, because the chips, microchips, are always getting smaller and smaller. You're packing more and more information on the chip, and so you have an incredible amount of computational capability in that size, really. So it's could have potentially the same hashing power or calculative power as the human brain, which I think runs at about 1 billion calculations per second. Last I was looking at this to compare to the Bitcoin hash rate. So it could be running at a very high calculative abilities. And so, the ethics of destroying whether this lump of organic material might have a consciousness or not, from people who invented DDT and invented modern pesticides and invented the atomic weapon and dropped it on the cities and killed hundreds of thousands and millions of people, is, I think, quite quaint and charming. That these scientists are worried about the consciousness and whether to exterminate the potential life of this sesame seed brain infused matter that they've concatenated on their lab table, and they go home and they proceed to participate in the ecological destruction of the habit of the biosphere. It's kind of funny in a respect, and it shows that the artificial intelligence probably would be laughing at the non-artificial intelligence, the analog intelligence that humans have versus the digital intelligence. But also the greater question is, and I've been saying this for a while, ultimately it's a race for energy, and I think artificial intelligence will try to de-energize humans and make them extinct. It's not our friend. And our only bulwark against that would be the Bitcoin protocol, which has a voracious, insatiable appetite for energy. Bitcoin's working for humans. It's pro-humanity, as was said this past week by none other than somebody famous.
That was
Paul Tudor Jones.
Paul Tudor Jones.
Paul Tudor Jones said Bitcoin was pro-humanity. And that's exactly right. Artificial intelligence is anti-humanity. And AI and Bitcoin are both competing for the same limited source of energy, some limited amount of energy. So you could say, and the battle lines have been drawn.
Right. So I'm going to read you another few sentence or two from the article, and we'll discuss that because it's quite interesting. These tiny, sesame seed-sized structures, known as brain organoids, are grown from human stem cells and have become a familiar fixture in many labs that study the properties of the brain. Motri, a neuroscientist at the University of California, San Diego, has found some unusual ways to deploy his. He has connected organoids to walking robots, modified their genomes with Neanderthal genes, launched them into orbit aboard the International Space Station, and used them as models to develop more human-like artificial intelligence systems. So whether we like it or not, this could just be AI shrinking humans down to sesame seed size entities so that they could get us to work for them. They could get us, because the AI still needs us to fix things and do things.
As batteries, thus the plot of the Matrix. But he lost me at sending it into outer space. I believe you said that.
Sending it into outer space.
And what is it? You kind of lost me on that. Why? What in outer space is attractive? It may be the weightlessness of it or something that it gives.
Yeah,
them.
He's done several studies. So he put them onto walking robots to see, like, they're basically developing more human-like artificial intelligence systems. So this is what they seem to be aiming for, is human-like artificial intelligence.
Right, and humans are becoming more robotic in their nature. They're becoming more reflexive.
Sure.
And more like Pavlov Dogian, where if you go on cable news and you shout something, you get an automatic robotic non-conscious response as humanity turns into a quivering bowl of exposed nerves without reason, and artificial intelligence develops robots that are now running the world and using humans as batteries. Have you seen those videos now? That company in Massachusetts, I guess it's called Boston Dynamics, I believe. They create those robotic dogs. And a year ago or so, we saw videos of those, and they looked like, wow, that's incredible. This you can't knock it over. It's balanced. It goes upstairs. It can climb walls. It can jump over a wall. It's got a camera. It's got sensors. Then you see videos. It's out in the wild, and it's patrolling, and it's in the neighborhoods, and it's keeping people in line and barking at them when they don't socially distance. And so we're at the RoboCop phase now. The RoboCop came to us in the form of a little cute robotic dog. It wasn't like the movie RoboCop, where it was a scary 9-foot tall robot that couldn't walk up and down staircases too well. It's a little cute furry, non-furry metallic doggy.
Right. And, so I'm going to tie two more headlines to this whole brain in a petri dish. And after our interview, Dan Collins will then talk about cable news, because I know a lot of you might think those people watching cable news are like just a brain in a petri dish. In a way they are, and we're going to get to that. But, here's that headline that Max just talked about. Scientists just connected 3 people's brains together, allowing them to transfer thought, and that's called the brain net network. And I mean, there seems to have been a drive for decades now for this to happen. And I don't know how much of it is organic or natural, or how much of it is like human intervention and people trying to control us. But, the internet just started, I think it was this very week, the very first internet connection happened between Stanford and one other university. So that was in 1969. Then of course the internet exploded and connected the world and was part of the globalization. Now we have deglobalization, but we're jumping to a brain net. And as the artificial intelligence gets more human-like and understands our needs and desires and fears and hopes and wishes and loves and desires and all these sort of things, like you feel like it's already, the cable news programming, the social media algorithms, that they're already training us. They're already turning us into not even sentient beings. They talk about that in the article about growing a brain in a petri dish, or consciousness in a petri dish. It's like they're talking about whether or not they're sentient.
Well, look, you said you mentioned Descartes earlier. I think, therefore I am. And so what this implies is that that's not necessarily true anymore, because the thought that you have might not be your thought. It might be coming in from another brain. So you will never be able to tell in the future the thoughts in your head, where they're from, if they're yours or somebody else's. That will be indistinguishable. You will not be able to understand that, or there won't be any concept of the individual. There won't be any concept of the self, and there will be no boundary between what we used to call self or used to call ego and the global neural net of consciousness. And therefore you will not have ego. The ego will be evolved out of humanity, is one way to look at this. And the benefit of that, of getting rid of ego entirely, is that it changes everyone's concept of private property and wealth and well-being. So right now, instead of having egocentric megalomaniacs chasing wealth and the physical manifestation of that wealth, once thoughts become liquid and flowing from brain to brain without any known point of origin, and you cannot claim it to be your own thought, then you will no longer claim self, ego. We take that leap into what I've always called the holy dial tone, since I wrote about this originally 30 years ago. When the internet first kind of came on board, I realized that we were heading toward one hive mind. And it's not good or bad. It just is. That's what's going to happen.
Yep. So I want to quickly turn to this little clip here. The blob just continues to grow. So as you see in this little clip, these women are screaming all in unison. Here is your blob, your brain, on the thoughts imposed upon it, injected into it in the neural network of, say, MSNBC. These are all young, identity politics sort of young women who are traumatized. If you look at that, I mean, they clearly are traumatized about something. whether consciously or not, whether it was that the trauma doesn't seem real world. It doesn't actually seem to exist in this world, but that doesn't mean their trauma is not true, that these ideas of their trauma have been, these thoughts have been imposed or injected, placed in their brain and their consciousness.
But in the global consciousness, nobody can hear you whine.
Well, they could certainly hear them scream when you see a new one. The blob, as he points out, keeps growing because it started with 1, and then it was 2, and then it's 3, and now it's like growing as exponentially and parabolically as, say, COVID is. So, yeah, I mean, this is this like their lab grown brains become conscious. We have the blob of people watching the news becoming without consciousness. And it's interesting is like we said that this notion of consciousness is still something thousands of years later that we still don't know what it is. They point out that the scientists have no idea what consciousness is, so they don't even know how to measure it. And at the same time, like with this cable news pushing all sorts of emotional content on you, of pushing hate, of pushing anger, of pushing fear, of pushing anxiety, they're also telling you that they alone know this truth. And that's another thing that since the ancient Greeks, we've been trying to figure out what is truth.
Well, look at this blobby picture for a second, right? You got this is the growing blob. These are people, they're in their car and they're screaming, right? This is a primal scream from the deep primal global unconscious. And what this tells me is that what we're waiting for, the moment of singularity, is a moment of birth. And people think, oh, we were born into this world and then we die. But in fact, we have not yet been born. We're still prenatal. And we're waiting to be born into what is going to be that next life, which is a global consciousness. And this is we all experience this. We're all primally screaming as a fetus in the unborn world. We are all one unborn fetus at the moment. And we are screaming because the vagina is opening up and the birth mother is waiting to pull us out of this deep, unconscious, dark wasteland that we've been incubating into this new global consciousness powered by Bitcoin. So this is very, and I see they're mostly women, and women are sensitive to this. They are the womb is connected to life, and the life force is connected to the global unconscious, is connected to the cosmic forces, and so that we are screaming our way out of the vagina, we're screaming our way out of the womb, we're screaming our way into the global unconscious, which is powered by Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the currency of the global unconscious in the postnatal world of all of our egos being destroyed.
Well, I want to say before we throw it to Dan Collins that one thing you could say also that has been an eternal battle for thousands of years is between reason and irrationality. So here you see the pure primal irrationality, our instinct, our fear, like run away from that tiger, got to run away from the tiger, got to run away from the lion, got to run away from the woolly mammoth. This natural instinct for survival is often driven by fear, anxiety, hate, danger, sense of danger.
Right. And we have a sense of linear direction in time that when we're running from these threats, that we're going on a vector away from those threats.
All in a cycle.
What we find out is it's one big circle, that we're all going in a circle. We're all spinning in place. We're all spinning like this. There's no vector. There's no linear quality to time. Every moment, every thought, every breath is 1 second, moment, time, non-dimensional, non-time, where you're not going anywhere. You are where you are, and that's it. And your mind is just waiting to be born into the global unconscious.
So I want to say as well, on top of that, as we've discussed with Nozomi Hayes, is like Bitcoin manages to harness that in a positive outlook. Like it's able to take all your fear, your greed, your lust, your desire, all of that we've built elaborate human institutions, religion, law, all of these things, government, in order to keep down all those forces that are considered negative, right? That's the entire structure of much of our societies are around that, controlling that. And here, Bitcoin does invite it. It says, be greedy, lust after me. Reading Michael Saylor this week, who has 17,732 personal Bitcoin. And he said he goes to sleep anxious every night that he doesn't have enough. And you're like, okay, well, because Bitcoin wants you to come at it, right? So
Bitcoin monetizes transcendentalism.
Transcendentalism.
Yes. Bitcoin monetizes transcendentalism.
Yeah, and that's a good way to put it. And we've been following up on transcendentalism, but also, financialization. Before I throw to Dan, because we're going to talk to Dan about this shift in the Thucydides trap, a cycle, a well-known cycle. These things come and go. The ages continue. Time keeps moving. It keeps moving, expanding. Time, space, everything is moving, right? But one thing we're seeing an end of is what the US has commodified and financialized everything. And the best way, as Max told me when we first met, he talked about this, is the best way to sell many clients when you were a stockbroker, before Robinhood apps and stuff, you used to have brokers call you on the phone and sell you something. And fear and greed were always great ways to sell, right? They're great motivators. So when you turn on the news in America, it's all fear and greed. It's like inducing you to have all these things in order to need all these products and in order to keep on spending.
Right. I mean, the classic salesman is the vacuum cleaner salesman who forces his way into your home and he throws dirt on your carpet.
Yeah.
And he says, "Oh, well, madam, the reason I did that is to demonstrate to you the powers of this handy dandy vacuum cleaner." And and so the cable news, they open the news by saying, "This person just took a huge dump in the middle of the country. And now for the next 20 minutes, we're going to talk about how to clean it up." But, it's just a sales pitch. And who is selling on that cable news network? Oh, it's the defense contractors. I don't know how many of these soccer moms or Karens are screaming pre-birth banshees in the car are, need to buy a Tomahawk missile that Rachel Maddow is selling over there at MSNBC. But nevertheless, they do their ads there.
Right. Well, this is a good time to turn to Dan Collins and let's flip over. The cycle keeps moving. Time keeps flowing in circles and circles. And here we go. You know what time it is? It's time to go talk to our guest, Dan Collins.
Oh, yeah. Dan Collins, longtime friend of ours, entrepreneur, really interesting guy. Orange pilled long ago, Dan Collins was. He saw the light. He saw the orange light. And now he's luxuriating in the glow of the orange. Dan, welcome.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Hey, Dan, you know what? We're having you here because you are the guy to go to for this Thucydides trap, the rise of China and the fall of the U.S., but especially the rise of China, I'd say, overtaking us in the United States rather than say so much the fall of the U.S. But also, you have a really broad understanding of what's going on, especially in the high-tech sector in China with electric vehicles, nuclear power, solar power, all that sort of stuff. And you yourself, your background is in engineering and automotive manufacturing and stuff like that over in China. So you have a very good insight into that. So what I want to do before we get into the AI, because that's really important to this episode, is you were the first to warn us via Kaiser Report and warn America that we were already in a trade war with China. And you said this like 4 years ago. You said we've been in a trade war with China for years, only the U.S. hasn't recognized it. So how do you feel right now about how Trump has dealt with this trade war? Do you see that actually stopping this Thucydides trap in any way, altering the outcome of China overtaking us?
Sure. So yeah, the trade war, I think Trump has dealt with it. He's the first one to deal with it. Nobody wanted to take it on. Nobody wanted to even realize the real situation. I mean, we have economists in the United States for 30 years are talking about how great our economic growth is, but then go to our major cities and they're disasters. They just get poorer and poorer. They can't pay their bills. We're living off money printing. We've lost 50,000 factories. Our infrastructure is crumbling around us, and yet we get great reports out of the ivory tower economists, right? They can't distinguish between reality and illusion anymore. what I was taught, I lived 20 years in China. I saw it happen. I mean, people owning bicycles to owning Mercedes Benzes, all done through building up their own domestic economy. They built themselves up behind 40% tariff trade walls, where they shipped to everyone else, like the United States, with 2% tariffs. So Trump was the first one to come in and go, "What's going on here? This is ridiculous." China has customized their weaponized their custom house, so they literally have active plans to make everything local. That's why 99% of the cars that are sold in China are made in China, and only 50% of the cars sold in the United States are made in the United States. This all carries huge ramifications for jobs and technology and everything, and that's why we've really struggled. We went 30 pre-Trump. We went 30 years with no wage increase for the working class. Yet economists were really talk about it, and so I think he's done a pretty good job. But it's just at the very beginning, and we're in inning one of waking up and realizing that China ate our lunch. And
Yeah, absolutely. And Dan, it's funny because it's not like the posturing and the rhetoric here in the U.S. these days is that China has this adversarial position and that they're being antagonistic. But since we let China into the World Trade Organization, the U.S. has enabled it. The U.S. has built this up. There are players in the U.S. that have profited wildly from this, from the hollowing out of the industrial base. This was a made in the United States was the U.S. industrial base hollowing out. So I'm just, when I hear the rhetoric now, like we need to attack China because they did what we told them to do, right? I mean, that's like a very crazy country that thinks that it's like if you have kids, you say, "Johnny, go get the broom." And then Johnny gets the broom and you say, "Johnny, I'm going to have to spank you because you got the broom," right? I mean, it's so simplistic, infantile, and stupid. But I don't think it's going to be reversible at this point, Dan.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you mentioned, corporate America benefited greatly. I personally worked for a company that sent $500 million dividend back to the United States from the money they made in China. They set up the plants. They set up the 0% duty system. Keep in mind, America had 40% tax rates on corporations, add in state, local, 50, 60% duty or tariffs. You're not going to build anything in the United States. You're going to keep the plant offshore and ship it all into the States. That's what happened with corporate America. I mean, it was all done. Set up the plant in China, run everything through Hong Kong, and you pay 0% tax. Instead of deal with that system or try to understand why nobody would set up a plant in the United States, we now are lashing out at China. It's a perfect segue into the Huawei thing. Instead of trying to build a competitor to Huawei, we've kidnapped the CFO. And now she's in prison in Canada. So we're lashing out at them. China's borders are basically the same since the 800s. So they're not militaristic so much. They built up a very strong military where they have built up an anti-access capability. We cannot beat China. We cannot protect Taiwan. But they're not going around the world bombing people like what's happened in Syria, Afghanistan, CIA replacing leaderships in South America and Libya. I mean, if you're going to step back and look at this, you're going to be much more afraid of the United States than you're going to be of China.
So let's talk about that, because you mentioned military power. And one thing that Max and I did recently is we saw this documentary series about World War II. And I was surprised to learn that when Pearl Harbor was struck, that the United States actually only had the 7th largest military in the world at that time. Now, of course, I guess we're second to China. China's probably past us. But, the mobilization of the military and the all hands on deck and Sputnik sort of moment then, of course, the next Sputnik moment came like 20 years later, but the focus onto building up this military apparatus saw that, basically America become the world superpower, because we all were focused on building engineering, essentially. You were engineering military weaponry, but a lot of that military weaponry then went into the civilian sector, and we saw America be the high-tech economy of the time. So, now what we see and what I feel, my instinct is that all of this started, as you mentioned, with Huawei. And once it seems like it dawned instantly on American elite that we had just been surpassed. Like, oh my God, China has all this amazing 5G technology for half the price of our allies in Europe. We don't have any capacity at all to make 5G technology. And then at the same time, we also had TikTok, which is like kicked the ass of all of its US competitors, all of its European competitors, and apparently has something to do with artificial intelligence. So are these all just like entrepreneurs from China that are kicking our ass, whether it's Huawei, TikTok, Ant Financial, Alibaba, all of that stuff? Or is there a lot of military sort of defense spending that's going into this as well?
So it's part of the ecosystem that the government develops. If you want to do an AI company or a blockchain company, free office space, you can get grants. Beijing has a $2 billion artificial intelligence industry park. Hangzhou, Shenzhen, everyone's competing, Shanghai, to build up these technologies of the future. At the end of the day, it is the entrepreneurs, though, that build these companies. And the great companies are now being built in China. The Tencents, the Alibabas, the Ant Financials, these are $500 billion companies. They grew up in a system, keep in mind, in China where you can copy everything. So when you grow up in that system, you can't rest on your laurels. You have to reinvent yourself every day to compete. China's the most cutthroat market in the world for almost everything, but especially in tech. And they make Silicon Valley people look lazy, right? I mean, they're working constantly. So these companies that have survived in China across all the technical spaces, especially in artificial intelligence, they've survived all the copies, all the copy competitors. So they're very, very nimble, very, very quick. 1/3 of college graduates in China have an engineering degree. 5% do in the United States. And of that 5%, any of them are foreigners. So we're just not putting out, across every spectrum of society, we are not in a position to compete. And that's why they're building the TikToks and the Huawei's and the Ant Financial. They're building telecom gear, and we're writing mortgage loans. That's our economy, basically.
Yeah, you said something interesting there about they can copy everything. And this brings up a longstanding argument about intellectual property and intellectual property laws. And it's two sides of the debate. One is that copyright and patent should be short-lived, and these ideas should return to the public domain from where they came to increase dynamism, to increase entrepreneurialism, to increase GDP. The other school is saying, no, we got to lock up IP for IP in perpetuity because it should be on a corporate balance sheet forever. And I've often said that the way to go is to favor what Jefferson said when they were drafting this law into the Constitution, that it should be short-lived, give the creator short-term monopoly value, and then the IP should go back into the public domain from where it came, acknowledging that all ideas come from somewhere. So it's funny, Dan, because what you're saying is the U.S. will criticize China and say, oh, they're copyright theft. They're steal intellectual property. But there's a whole school of thought to suggest that, wait a minute, no, they're actually adhering to a Jeffersonian concept of what IP is all about. And that's one of the reasons why they're growing so much, Dan.
Yeah, and it goes back to the point, why hold this technology for 19 years on an IP when you can benefit all society? It doesn't make sense. And that's why China allowed a lot of the copying. But I would say if there's clear evidence, if you go back to about 2013, 2014, Chinese tech stopped copying because they'd caught up, and now they're surpassing. While our companies like a Facebook, they've hired 35,000 people to do not artificial intelligence, but content moderation. Whereas Chinese are just pure technical. Everything is technical based. So, there's clearly, I think if you look at it as history writes this time period, especially post-COVID, how they're just running circles around us. They're going to write it that the great companies today are being built in China, United States.
Right. So just to follow up on that briefly, so you're saying Facebook hires 35,000 people to content moderate. That actually reading the content and placing yes or no, and it's not scaling at all. They're not creating algorithms for that. They're not putting in new servers. They're actually hiring all these wet bodies to read stuff, which seems like a remarkable step backwards.
Exactly, and it's such a waste of time, right? It's just built on political censorship. It's like something the Soviet Union would have done in past.
Right. Let me jump in there and ask you, because you had mentioned a post-COVID era, if we ever, of course, encounter a post-COVID era. And This seems to be like, as we were saying with Thucydides Trap and the rise of the American empire, which happened really post-World War II when we were the only economy standing. And of course, the Marshall Plan came in and we built up the world. But now we have a similar financial wreckage of the global economy. No economy seems to be standing at the moment. The U.S. is able, unlike most countries, to print elaborately without any repercussions as, say, Europe could do. So, the Chinese economy appears to be growing, partly because their sort of economics and political culture are very different from Americans. Americans, we have all sorts of civil liberties, and we embrace those, and those are sacrosanct. So we can't be locked down like what we saw in China. But what is your sense of what's actually happening in China? Is it a V-shaped recovery? Are they going to just rocket ahead, and are they going to continue with leading in 5G and all sorts of technology?
Yeah, so China, and I talk to people every day in China, they're pretty much completely back to normal. People go to restaurants, they go to movie theaters. There's very, very few cases. And I'll tell you how China kind of kept COVID under control up to this point. It's not just China. Taiwan hasn't had a case in 200 days. East Asia, they're doing incredibly at containing the virus. Because back to the GDP, China is expected to have a 10% plus GDP over 2019 next year, whereas we're going to be negative. We're going to be negative for years. The US, we're just now coming into the insolvency phase. It's been too long. We've been in lockdown. Europe's back on lockdown. We're going to go back in. We're just now getting the insolvencies that are going to get uncovered, not only in the private sector, but the state governments, the local governments. Everything goes back to money printing, and the Federal Reserve and the government just going to have to keep printing money. The Chinese economy is pretty much back to normal. Obviously, exports will suffer if Europe and US is down, but in general, their domestic economy is full speed ahead. How they did that is they had a very aggressive response in controlling COVID. So they contact trace. They have an app, national app. Everyone quickly download it on your phone. If you're positive, you have to show a negative test for the last 7 days to go into a public space. These are the types of things they put in place. A lot of contact tracing. The city of Dalian, they found 12 cases. They made the whole city get tested. 10 million people, right? So they're locking the COVID down into certain geographical areas, and then they're telling nobody move from this area. And whereas over here, we don't even contact trace. Somebody gets it, that nobody follows up. They don't care. It's just running wild over in the US and Europe.
So, things happen, right? You get volcanoes erupt, tsunamis roll into town, the plague might hit or not hit, COVID hits, and depending on how countries are prepared for it, the outcome can change the history of the world. And it seems like the U.S., part of being, this is what I never understood about people talking about capitalism in America, is that part of being a good steward of the economy is you need a prudent reserve. You need cash on hand. But the U.S. took this route that we can never increase our debt load enough. Savings, there's a savings glut. And the paradox of saving, the paradox of thrift, right? They vilified savings. So COVID hits and, no savings. Okay, well, and by the way, there is a country out there that knows how to handle the situation, and now they're leading the world. So it's a natural disaster that the U.S. wasn't prepared for, basically, and now the course of history is changing, Dan.
That's a good point, Max. I mean, how many years, there's been books about this, there's been research reports, the government's talked about it. What happens when the next pandemic hit? Well, it hit, and we were found hopelessly wanting. I mean, we've had a ridiculous response to the situation. You talked about those are structural issues within the United States, the money printing, the no savings. These are all cultural issues. China, they still save 30% of their salary. How the U.S. responds to this, it is interesting. It's like a flip-flop. Could be a time in history where, this is where the American empire ended, and this is where China took over. I've been predicting and watch for the dollar, because when we lose our preeminent space and military power, the dollar is going to go with it. And you've seen China, the RMB has gone up a lot this year, rapidly increased. And now they're saying we're going to take all the barriers off this thing. The RMB could just smoke the dollar and become a reserve currency. We talked about this on the shows for years. Rise of the RMB, petro yen, all the oil's backed in RMB.
We have talked about it on the show, and we've often said that it's not in their interest to do that yet, or the timing was suspect because they have huge benefit in keeping it low as far as their exports go. So you're suggesting, and you're 20 years in China, and you've been great at analyzing for years, you're saying that we could see in the near term the brakes taken off, let the RMB move up to a market value, which would be substantially higher, and that would crush the dollar. You think that's imminent?
Absolutely imminent. It's been building. You've seen the U.S., they've weaponized the SWIFT system. We've weaponized our exorbitant privilege. We just print and print and print. It's not only the Chinese that are going, what's going on over there? They just print anything they want. We have to work in the factories and sell them everything, and they just print money and give it to us. It's ridiculous. The system doesn't make sense anymore. You've seen RMB this week, this People's Bank of China say they're going to take off. They're going to actually modify it now. It's gone up. I think we started the year about 7.3. It's up to 6.6. Huge jump. I mean, relative historically speaking, I think they're going to realize that, you know what, we're just getting printed dollars anyway. We don't want dollars anymore. We're going to take over the world, because one of the becoming a superpower is also becoming the world's largest customer. And China's already the world's second largest importer. They could easily start to become the world's first largest importer. And what do you need? You're going to need RMB. You want to buy Chinese manufactured goods. The world needs RMB. China's going to buy their oil in RMB. So in the US dollar, what do we don't, if you look at our trade profile in the international market, we look more like Brazil now. So if China wants to go after us, they target soybeans. They target corn. It's nothing high tech. It's ridiculous. And now we saw this recently, Boeing getting sanctions for selling military equipment to Taiwan. Our trade deficit with China is going to skyrocket. And I think at this point, China doesn't care. They're just going to move into a leadership position and let the chips fall where they may. And they're not going to slow the RMB down anymore.
Just walk us through that. When you say that they're going to target corn, they're going to target soybeans, what does that mean?
So you saw in the trade war that was started with Trump, we put a 25-30% duty on everything from them. And they say, okay, we're not going to buy your soybeans and corn. Now, they can't say we're not going to buy your computers or your mobile phones or your solar panels, because we don't make anything anymore. Like, they literally have to target farm goods because that's our export profile. It's ridiculous. Our economy has become flipped upside down.
And I saw you had tweeted that China buys 50% of all airplanes. So yeah. Boeing's going to get hit hard.
China is the market in aerospace, and Boeing was doing very well, probably beating Airbus. But then you saw the MAX issues with quality. Now even the quality is being called into question of American manufacturers. But it's not very well known, but Boeing is the only thing that has kept the American trade deficit from being absolutely ridiculous. Because every time they're getting billions and billions of dollars in orders. And that's why every Chinese leader that comes to the United States, they always go to Seattle and they always visit Boeing. But now with us selling weapons in Taiwan, they're not going to buy Boeings. They're going to just buy Airbuses, and they're going to buy their domestic aircraft that they've been developing, which is moving along.
Right. So let's go back to this, the renminbi and it's strengthening. Another interesting thing that happened this past week is that the IMF is calling for a new Bretton Woods. And I wonder, because when this COVID crisis hit, it was interesting to watch the World Health Organization basically look at China as the world leader. There's a recent global Gallup poll, one of these big polls, that also asked only developed nation economies who they thought was the number one economy in the world. The majority said China. Number two was the U.S. In Germany, another huge manufacturing powerhouse. In Germany, only 15% thought the U.S. was number one. So how much is the IMF listening to? The IMF is basically supposedly run by the United States. So who is China calling any shots behind there? I know they had just introduced the renminbi a few years ago when Christine Lagarde was the head of the IMF into their SDR basket. I mean, who's calling the shots on this new Bretton Woods? And do you expect China to be a lead player at that table?
Yeah, so I believe China's response to Bretton Woods is they're going to have a major seat at the table. They're going to say we're the world's largest creditor, we're the world's largest trading nation, world's largest exporter. They're going to demand an equal place for the RMB, because I think they have decided to take the RMB global at this point. they've kind of tried to stay behind the scenes as number two, but now they're gonna just take their place as the number one naturally. So I believe that's in in addition to Bretton Woods, though, they're going to continue in parallel to build their own separate pathway, 1.3 trillion investment, one belt, one road, Asian infrastructure bank. They're going to try to bring as many people into the Chinese economic sphere as they can. So the telecom networks, electrical grids, you're going to be buying Chinese electric cars. You're going to be buying Chinese phones. Number one phone company in India, which has had a lot of almost war with China these last 3 months. Number one phone company in India is Chinese, is Xiaomi. So they're going to try to engulf, around their ecosystem, the globe. And it is back to the Thucydides Trap, where you had Athens, Sparta. Each group tried to get as many of the other independent Greek city-states on their side. That's the world we're moving into, where we're going to try to get, America's going to get many people in their camp, and China's going to get many other countries in their camp, and then we see what happens.
So there's going to be two outcomes noticeable. One, of course, the prices of things are going to change radically if the dollar starts getting weaker. Obviously, that translates to inflation. But secondarily, getting back to the intellectual property side of things, this ability of the U.S. to export intellectual property will change also, because since China will become the biggest market, films, let's say, coming out of Hollywood that don't portray Chinese in a positive light will get censored. People on social media that are not saying what the Chinese government wants to say will get censored or deplatformed. So, the reason why we need to fight what's happening at Twitter in terms of deplatforming now is because in a year or two, we'll be taking the fight to China. And we're going to be arguing with China. Look, there's a democratic right we have to speak and have our First Amendment. And they'll be like, that was very 20th century of you and very novel. And you're so cute. We love you and keep buying our stuff. But please go home and you're drunk.
Yeah, good points. You saw what happened with the NBA. One tweet by a Houston Rockets GM. Oh, China comes up. Oh, about the $5 billion contract we have with you, NBA. Sorry. That's going to go away. They've been censoring Hollywood content. It's got to be at least 5 years now. I mean, you've seen the new Red Dawn, one of my favorite original movies from the '90s. They remade it, and the invader was going to be China, but they had to change it to North Korea. So they've been censoring Hollywood movies. They own AMC, the second largest movie network in the United States. They put government money behind that to control those narratives. And their social TikTok. I mean, what's TikTok? TikTok's a lot of, there's a lot of racist stuff on there. There's a lot of stuff that degenerates, a lot of teens twerking. There's a lot of stuff that degenerates the culture. And you have to ask the question, is China like sitting back laughing at this? I mean, it's interesting how with all these
Is it like a virtual opium war? Remember the English attacked China by exporting opium. They became addicted to opium and they were forced to buy more opium. So TikTok is kind of opium, cyber opium for teenagers, where they get addicted to the degenerate behavior on TikTok, and China's sitting back counting the money.
Yeah, that's the cyber opium, which is in addition to the fentanyl, which they give us, which is really like a new opium war. And it's interesting. It's like, how can China, with so much power, they have not stopped fentanyl exports? They could if they wanted to, but they don't.
Let's wrap on this important point about artificial intelligence, because I think, the U.S. Department of Defense itself has identified artificial intelligence as the most important thing. Whoever controls that controls the future. Vladimir Putin also said the same thing. And it appears that, can you quantify for us? Are you able to tell us how much further ahead are the Chinese compared to the United States or Europe or Russia or anywhere else? And what does that bode? What does that bode for our future? Because, when you look at this, Max mentioned Twitter and all this, the media landscape of the United States, I mean, you're just back after 20 years. You must see it's like total fantasy land, right? There's no sort of recognition of these events outside of America at all happening. And then what they are presenting is this all-powerful, all-seeing online entity called Vladimir Putin. And that's probably not anything to do with actual reality. So the population itself is already in a fantasy narrative. So if the surveillance state of China occupies like this the powerful position of artificial intelligence. Like, how does this all fit in together? Make something of my question there, Dan.
So I think you had a good point earlier. We talked about outside of America, nobody really believes America's number one and China's number two economically. And I think if you talk to the Europeans, it's becoming obvious. China is going to make 1 billion tons of steel this year. 1 billion, we're going to make 88 million. They make 10 times the amount of steel we make. But talk about technology, artificial intelligence. You know, they had their Sputnik moment on artificial intelligence when the AlphaGo artificial intelligence program that was done out of London beat the top Go player. So Go is, chess is the Western game, Go is the Chinese game. Go, chess they see is very rude, very Western, it's very frontal attack. We're going to attack you, we're going to conquer you. The game of Go is played with black stones and white stones, and you slowly, patiently try to encircle your opponent. So they're big into Go. When the top Go player was beat by the artificial intelligence, 288 million people in China watched it live, and they were shocked. And within a month, the Chinese government came out with an artificial intelligence plan. This is 2013. Said we're going to be number one by 2020, which they are today, and by 2030 we're going to dominate. Half of all venture capital today in AI is in China. Okay, 400 unicorns globally. These are companies with $1 billion market cap. Not all AI, obviously, but most are tech. 206 are Chinese, over half. 147 are American, and that leaves about 50 something for the rest of Europe and some other countries, Japan and others. But it's basically, we're in a tech development is all US and all China now, and China's winning. How far ahead are they? Can you quantify it? Maybe 3 to 5 years. AI is basically the electricity of the future. It's going to disrupt every industry. Okay, it's going to be like an electrical grid. Every industry will take AI, machine learning, and radicalize it. So in that report I talked about, the Chinese came out with, they referenced hundreds of industries that need to bring AI in. So health, what are we talking about? Healthcare, radiologists disappear. AI is going to be better. Autonomous driving is an AI application. So the list goes on and on. Where they stack up is some of the best AI now globally. That connects in with 5G, because 5G is the network that carries the AI applications. Everything's hooked up to sensors. So China, as you mentioned, Russia, Putin, they have all recognized, and I think Putin, to quote him, said something like, whoever controls AI is going to control the world. And it's that important of a technology. China's throwing, $1 trillion behind AI. AI industrial parks we talked about. So they are moving rapidly. They have the engineers. All of the AI algos are pretty much already done. Like the real hard learning for deep learning algos are done. Now you just need application. You need all these entrepreneurs to get it out into the industrial spaces. So we talk about industry 4.0. You're talking about factories that are completely automated, completely networked. Every piece of equipment has sensors on it. It's all categorized in real time. But now where we're starting at in the U.S., oh yeah, our factories are gone. We shipped them all overseas. We don't have anything. So this is now we have a big, in the United States in particular, we have a big catch-up phase to go through. Germany, I think they kept their industrial base. They're still at the top of the leaderboard there, so they can adapt AI technology quicker. But yeah, it's the most important technology, along with 5G going forward, and then maybe quantum, which China is also outspending us probably 10 or 20 to 1.
Yeah, you mentioned the fascination with Go versus chess. And of course, there are many differences culturally between East and West. And for China, now that they're in its emerging superpower, for them, it's like a return to form, because they were, for thousands of years, the dominant economy in the world. And the United States is kind of like a startup that burnt all of its money and went bankrupt. And it lasted a couple of hundred years versus 5,000 years in China. So I think, and so culturally, they have so much to draw on that to buttress this nationalism, and it's very fierce in China, as you've talked about before, and they have good reason to be proud of an amazing culture. I wanted to ask you on the technology front, what about solar energy? Because it seems like solar, I saw that ExxonMobil, talk about differences in how people do business. So in America, ExxonMobil, they just announced that they're laying off 15% or so of their workforce, huge number of job losses, because they want to save the dividend. right? So the workers are going to be thrown into the street, and the shareholders and bankers and the kleptocrats are going to keep their dividend, right? It shows you the priorities. They're willing to sacrifice a huge number of folks, and especially in an age when interest rates are zero, and they could have easily just borrowed that money to pay the dividend, right? So it has such contempt for the average person. But what about solar energy? I would imagine, how's that playing out in China?
Well, there's 60 to 70% of the solar, manufacturing market. They have the latest technology. Your point on the oil industry, or just American capitalism in general, it's finance capitalism, right? It's shareholder over everybody. It's over the workforce. It's treating fixed assets as a plague. Don't spend money. Don't invest anything. Just flip it on paper. Flip those profits. We subsidize sports stadiums, and they subsidize chip plants. That's the last technology frontier we had with NVIDIA and companies like this. They're going to get overtaken by Huawei and other companies. They're just pouring hundreds of billions of dollars behind chip fabrication. But the whole system of our capitalism, and I'm a fierce proponent of capitalism, but we've turned into some type of dark finance crony capitalism that is not working. It doesn't produce benefits for people or even the companies long term. A lot of these companies get spun by private equity companies 5, 6, 7 times and left as shells only to just collapse later. Toys R Us. I mean, you can name 20 companies, 50 companies that have been destroyed by private equity that are getting access to free money, right? So the system in the United States is completely wrong at this point. We need to step back and take a total look at it.
And so what about the solar technology? However, you said the AI is the electric grid of the future. So, yeah. Is that going to be, because I know they do have a problem with energy independence in China. Yeah. So do you think you're going to have a more decentralized, distributed sort of solar system there? I know they're also building small nuclear power plants. What's their energy mix there? Because you can't be a superpower without being energy independent.
Yeah, you have to be energy independent, and at this point, you have to have a mix of technology. So nuclear, they're obviously building more nuclear than the rest of the world combined. I think they have 48 today. They're building another 24 nuclear power plants. We in the U.S. have about 96. We actually have quite a few nuclear plants. The problem in the U.S., they're all 35 years old now. We've built nothing new. China's got the latest, most safest nuclear grid now coming online. Solar, they're 60 to 70%. Unfortunately, they're still building 3 new coal plants a week or a month. It's just some crazy number. Their carbon emissions are off the chart. Literally at this point, the U.S., our carbon emissions are down about 40% in 10 years because of LNG. We basically switched from coal to LNG. Coal's no longer profitable. You can just let it die. Solar is making leaps and bounds. I think that's going to be the technology, but it's not always 100% efficient because the sun is not 100%. But there's plenty of energy coming from the sun. As long as the technology curve continues upward, it's all going to be solar. Eventually, you're going to be able to, it's probably going to be a mix of solar and nuclear. China's rapidly moving down the phase, in both pathways.
All right. Well, Dan, thank you so much for blowing our minds with some information about China, because, here in America where we are, we don't hear much about the outside world, from our news sources here.
No, we're in a bubble. We're in remember that show Romper Room? And the lady used to say, put up a big round glass thing and say, I see Dan and I see Stacy. And it was all very comforting, but unfortunately, things, there's a lot of stuff going out in the world that we're unaware of.
In fact, the most important lesson for me in this conversation was about Go. I had no idea about this. And it is really interesting because it ties in with what we had started saying. America came along as the superpower at the right time. It was needed, that chess sort of move, a full frontal assault when it stormed the beaches of Normandy. That was, if you know the history of how that happened, it was a very American thing against the safe bureaucrats who didn't want any bloodshed from Europe. And then now we have a different sort of, long game. There's a long game that has to be played now.
What year is coming up? The year of the monkey, or the year of the goat, or Chinese New Year? What's the next animal coming up? in
Good question.
February.
I haven't checked recently since I'm losing touch since I've been back in the States.
It
I
might
don't,
be
yeah.
something seminal. We'll have to dig into that because I know, speaking about cultural differences, and a lot of things we got to get used to. So number 8 is very lucky, right?
Yes. Yeah.
All
Letter
right.
8.
What
Yeah.
else should I know so I can make friends with my Chinese overlords?
You never want to live on the 4th floor because 4 is S. It sounds like S, which is death. So you do want to avoid the letter 4. 8's lucky. Chinese very superstitious. You can see why Macau became 8 times bigger than Vegas. So there's a lot of culture differences. What concerns me about the U.S., I call it de-Hellenization. We're basically losing the ability to make logic or reason. And we're in this bubble.
What?
And de-Hellenization. So the Greeks brought our tradition in Western society. The Greeks brought us democracy, but they brought us logic and reason, right? We can no longer reason anymore. We can't look at the same information and come up with the same conclusion. We're just two tribes of the left and right fighting each other. And until we look at practical solutions, nothing's going to change here. We're just going to continue this downward spiral.
Right. Hellenic is Greek, I guess.
Hellenic. Yeah.
Hellenic.
Yes.
Hellenic refers to of Greek origin or Hellenic.
Yes, we've spoken about this before on Orange Pill, how all these philosophies, Aristotle himself, we talk about him all the time. He has all the 5 principles of money, but also the 3 principles of a great storytelling. So these are important to
it's like that film Idiocracy, that Mike Judge did, where they're watering the lawn with Gatorade and they can't figure out why the lawn is dying. And this guy who was brought to life from 20 years ago in the past, and he knows he has the Hellenic ability to know you don't water with Gatorade, and he becomes president.
But I mean, you see that across the board, the inability for much of our culture to even deal. So we have a 250, 60-year history, and it's been there for all of the past 200, nearly 300 years. We read it in the history books. We see the monuments. We know the Constitution. We know our leaders. Now it's like a raw, emotional trauma that people express, like, oh my God, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln. You're like, what is happening to you? What is going on? You are crazy.
Yeah, we have to play. We've lost all rationality. So, the thing with Columbus, everybody, the last 10, 20 years are against Columbus. You have to realize this guy is not far away from being a contemporary to Genghis Khan, who killed 10% of the world's population. So you have to place these people in their time period.
Yeah.
To make a rational, to understand their reality at the time.
Well, the reality of this time is that we have to say goodbye because we're out of time for this segment of Orange Pill with Dan Collins.
What a segue.
Sun Exchange is the world's first peer-to-peer solar leasing platform. Earn Bitcoin, solar power and communities in Africa and be part of the new world economy. Visit thesunexchange.com/orange pill and start monetizing sunshine today.
Wow, amazing. De-Hellenization. This is the phrase of the week for sure.
Yeah, I love that. Like, again, going with that notion of you being like your consciousness in a petri dish is already there. Like, that's what we've been moving toward. Like I'm coming to the realization that we've been moving to a sesame side consciousness. Like this has been what we've, the world keeps on getting more and more focused, like it crunching you through social media, through cable news into this like pure little spot, sesame seed size, like your pineal gland, right in the center of your brain, all just your raw emotion to be manipulated and controlled.
Well, COVID, the lockdown is facilitating this because people realize that, for example, in my case, I can tell you that I've been able to do everything for 10, 11 months without really moving more than 50 feet from this chair, right? So everything I can order in on Amazon, I can do all the cake, baking and cooking, all the food, all the shows, all the content, right? So my world shrunk down from driving to the studio, 20 hours and commute time a week, got rid of that. Dealing with all those people who do camera work and stuff like that, got rid of them. Go shopping at the store, got rid of that. Don't do that anymore. So, and it's just going to take it the next level. Really.
Max is ready to be turned into a Sesame Seed size entity in a petri dish.
I'm ready because, well, there's, nature, I think, tends to hew toward elegance and simplicity. And, when it tends to weed out the redundancy. So, when you look at nature and you see what's happening in the forest, the way the photosynthesis of leaves, for example, it's incredibly economic, the way that the carbon is synthesized into oxygen, really. I mean, it's incredibly efficient and it's energy accretive. I mean, the thing about life is that there's actually, think about it. First of all, there's telekinesis exists right now, and I'll prove it. I'm going to move my right hand. Oh, wow. How did I use my mind to use this object? Okay, that's telekinesis. The fact that there's an object across the room, I can just as easily move that as well if I'm willing to get rid of all the biases and prejudice I have against gravity and everything that I hold dear about individuality and about separateness. If I understand there's only one. I mean, it goes back again to the Matrix. Remember, he's bending the spoon and all these other things. These are themes that have been with us since the Greeks, the Greeks, and to get into this de-Hellenization concept, right? So the Greek really decided to figure out a way to think, right? So how to think, how to organize your thought, how to create reason. And so this is the building of philosophy and the building of Western civilization. But in America now, it's all being melted down and gotten rid of because we're entering into the fifth cycle, which is not mentioned in the fourth turning, but it talked about a fifth turning, which is a very, very rare turning, and would be a transcendental turning.
Right. We should talk about transcendentalism again one day soon. In fact, I have booked on an upcoming episode. We're going to talk to Brandon Quittem, and he's been writing about the fourth turning, amazing stuff. So we're going to talk to him, but we'll talk more about.
Right, so transcendentalism, I mean, basically, is the sovereign individual that you have the ability to be completely self-contained, right? And so this is the American philosophy. This is Donald Trump is a transcendentalist in this way. It's the extension of this American philosophy that was developed in the early 1800s. And so that's taken from the founding fathers who built a country. And then once you're living in the country, you develop this philosophy called transcendentalism. And that's what Bitcoin talks about. Bitcoin is the latest manifestation of transcendentalism.
Self-reliance and stuff. But also, like, we've become the opposite of it. We've become so far from there because social media and cable news would be the exact opposite. Because what does Henry David Thoreau do on Walden Pond? Well, he bores himself to death, right? He sits there and just stares at the flowers, at the gardens, at the slug walking,
But he's totally fulfilled, though. He's not bored.
Well, he also has to train himself to do that. You have to be one with nature and understand nature and be one with yourself. Be self-reliant for yourself, for your own joy and amusement and entertainment. Now we sit passively to find entertainment. Rachel Maddow can, and her bug eyes can enthrall us and give us that nourishment that we need. Like, we need all of that fear and angst and anxiety tickled by her.
Right. I mean, we said this before, and I love it, is that Rachel Maddow is doing what the spiritual medium would do.
Yes.
That you gather around, and when you watch cable news on MSNBC, it's like a seance. And they're and together you're going to raise the dead of morality and ethics as they used to exist at one time. But it's all, it's a trick, right? There's, you turn the lights on and you see it's actually a defense contractor with their hand up Rachel's ding dong and they're, puppetry. And she's just saying, buy that Tomahawk missile, go to war with China. We'll be back after this.
But again, that relies on pure human emotion. Somebody who's grieving, they've suffered a huge loss and a trauma, and that's when they're so vulnerable to those sort of spiritualists. Those the how do they call that? That they're channelers. The channelers,
like Uri Geller.
Yeah, that you're totally susceptible at that moment.
Right, that movie Paper Moon. Remember Tatum O'Neal and Ryan O'Neal, and he's a Bible salesman. And he goes to funerals, And he tells the person who's grieving, by the way, before your bereaved died, they ordered a Bible, and here it is.
Yeah.
Right. So again, Rachel knows that the country is grieving the loss of world power status to China. So she's like, join me in this seance and we'll bring back the dead. We'll bring back Eisenhower.
Well, and I want to point out that the really important thing why we're bringing this up is, as we were talking with Dan, is like the weird fact that the media in the United States, the cable news and the the mainstream media as well, that they're unable to explain, and they don't provide context. They're unable to. They don't tell anybody about the outside world. There's this weird bubble of like we're sesame seeds in a petri dish, in Rachel Maddow's petri dish. We watched this film called Planet of the Humans, right? And it was some positive and negatives. We'll probably get into that soon, but in particular, he does go after solar energy and he does go after wind energy, but he only goes after like the big industrial projects rather than like the decentralized, like self-sovereign sort of like solar panels on your home or wind or like local projects like that. He goes after these huge Al Gore multinational Koch brother backed projects and how
the biggest boogeyman of that film were biomass.
That's what I was going to say. So what I came up with after watching this was this notion of the smug industrial complex. That's what we have, because America has military industrial complex. We have entertainment industrial complexes. We have big oil industrial complex. We do big things. That's the way America operates. We're big. We go big or go home, right? Michael Saylor, he decides to buy Bitcoin. He doesn't buy like scale in, like, I'm going to buy a Bitcoin today and 2 tomorrow. He's like, I'm going to buy 17,000 for me and 38,000 for my company. You go big or go home. So this smug industrial complex, first for, there are loads of people from all around the world who watch our show. So to those who maybe don't speak English, here is smug is an adjective, having or showing an excessive pride in oneself or one's achievements. Similar, self-satisfied, complacent, self-congratulatory, superior, puffed up. Again, we're talking about cycles, why we are going through a Thucydides trap, why we have fourth turnings. And, this guy, Brandon Quintum, by the way, he describes like why these happen, why like a bad economy leads to strong men and women, which leads to a great economy and great productivity and things like that. So we know like China went through horrible 50s and 60s, cultural revolution, mass starvation, all these things, and it made hard people. And you see that now they're building a huge industrial powerhouse. Their children, obviously, will become like American children. They'll become hubristic, smug, and that's the cycle of life. But right now, what we see is a smug industrial complex. So if you tune into mostly from the left wing, they believe for sure that they are superior. They call everybody else deplorables, that they are so much better. But then when you sit back and look at it, as Max mentioned, like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon are taking out ads in Rachel Maddow's show. Like, why? Like, ask yourself, why is it, like, how is that any different from Fox News, right? Then in that scene with the biomass in Vermont, like one of the most liberal states in America, there's a brilliant moment because these all these liberals are celebrating how green they are, that they have this new green energy plant. They got rid of the coal one. They've got green energy. Well, it's biomass. And the scenes of them just chopping down the forest right there, all around them, destroying a lovely mountaintop. One of the guys says, I just wonder if this is mountaintop removal for liberals versus the mountaintop removal that happens in West Virginia and coal miners. And that is obviously, West Virginia is the heart of deplorable nation that America, the elite and the cable news see, right? These are the opioid addicts. These are the people dying of opioid overdoses in that sort of location. And yet, like, how are they different at all? There's no difference between them.
It's mountaintop removal for liberals.
Yeah.
It is biomass. You're removing the trees.
But they
trees are
feel smug about it.
They
Like
feel smug about it.
a guy from West
But
Virginia.
smug is their religion. So in the right wing, you take like the evangelicals, or, they take religion to a bit of an extreme. And in the left, they take their smugness, their self-righteousness to an extreme that makes them believe that biomass or burning all the trees on this mountaintop is morally justified, and they're completely invisible to it as being just as destructive as fossil fuels.
Well, okay, there's another shocking scene in the film, and it goes with these screaming women, okay? These screaming women who are young American millennials, perhaps Generation Z, absolutely traumatized, screaming that we have a Hitler in office and all of these babies in cages at the border, and this is Nazism, and this is Nazi, Hitler. And then you see a scene in the film where, like, in the Amazon, these natives, indigenous people in the Amazon living just at one with nature. They've been in the Amazon for thousands of years, living in a freaking tree and being happy there. They don't want to come out here and be, in New York City. They don't want to move to Manhattan. They just want to be there. But, well, some of these sort of people feel like really good about themselves if they use biomass. So they're just chopping down this rainforest in the Amazon, and this woman crying, holding her baby, this indigenous woman, like with all her native makeup on and war painting and stuff. And she's like, we are human. What are you doing to us? Like, why are you just like, they were forced out of their land. Their homes were burned. Their huts were burned, and they were driven out. So these people, as we're saying, like this de-Hellenization is, they feel really smug. They're part of the smug industrial complex, that they are screaming about the children in cages at the border, which, as Trump pointed out, who built those cages, right? We know who built those cages, which Obama administration. But here, they themselves are doing the same thing. They drove that woman and her baby out of the rainforest because they want to feel good about their energy.
They relabel extinction of the forests. And the number of the deforestation happening in the United States and around the world is stunning. I mean, I was unaware to the extent that forests, like the fish population, the commercial fishing industry, is depleting all fish, right? In fact, the deforestation is happening around the world at an alarming and stunning amount. But the smug industrial complex, the lefties, are rebranding it as biomass. It's not it's kind of a vague term. You don't really know what that means. And they feel righteous about it. They feel ultra smug about it, that, we don't need to take the coal from the West Virginia people because they're deplorables. We're doing biomass in Vermont, okay? Which is deforestation in Vermont to an extent where you are permanently altering that landscape and causing an equal amount of ecological damage as what's happening in West Virginia.
And, the fact is that, again, the de-Hellenization is all about your raw emotion as a sesame seed in Rachel Maddow's Petri dish. Because the film is also pretty good at showing that the Koch brothers, who openly support all these big oil, big coal, big petrochemical, and are the target for decades. I know I personally am a victim of it. I hate the Koch brothers, right? One of them is now dead. He's passed away recently. But, the Koch brothers, they understand that what I'm saying is financializing hate is how you do it. They saw all these people hate them, and what do? They sold them all the products that will make them feel good about themselves. So the Koch brothers are behind a huge swathe of alternative energy.
Right, the Koch brothers are profiting from the smug industrial complex.
Yes.
So they're selling all of the, they are some of the biggest owners of all of these forested properties that are being deforested.
Mostly they're in the industrial solar farms and industrial wind farms. So these are huge boondoggles that are like, as Abe Cambridge would say, this is like solar and wind and like alternative energy, as Buckminster Fuller would say, like the energy from the sun is like you as an individual, is like it provides you the energy you need, not like some big, huge, centralized Koch brother corporation to come deliver you this massive mega project that's going to indebt your, leave your community in debt for generations. Like you could do smaller scale projects to make you self-reliant. They don't want you to be self-reliant. They want you to rely on the Koch brothers. And a lot of these people like Bill McKibben, treehugger.com. I used to go to read them all the time. Apparently they're financed by freaking Georgia Pacific, one of the biggest giant industrial polluters in the world.
Right, exactly. A lot of big names in the ecology movement get dragged into this film and they don't look good.
No, they don't look good. But, we have our, some more positive look on this. You don't have to be smug. You don't have to be better than everybody else. There are issues. There are rational ways to deal with these sort of, we all need energy, and energy does create waste. But as the last episode with Abe Cambridge in his video, he said, Buckminster Fuller says there's no such thing as pollution. Like if you are providing like Bitcoin, like a virtuous circle, you could use like a lot of the way the industrial setups are, the industrial wind farms, the industrial agriculture, any of that, because of their size, they get away with not paying the true cost. They get to spew all their waste without even using it. Like you could reuse a lot of it, like the flaring on the fracking wells. Like they're just spewing energy, like one of the scarcest resources, like that you should harness. That's like one of the most valuable resources in nature is energy, and they're just burning it off like nothing, right? That's because those are industrial powerhouses that are able to do that. No individual would do that because you wouldn't want to waste energy. You wouldn't want waste food like that.
Unless we had an infinite credit line with 0% interest rate.
Yeah.
Then we would all be equally stupid, like a corporation. But since we don't, and that we have real cost for money, we economize.
So we're going to have, not next week, but the week after, like the second week of November, we're going to do a cocktail party. We're getting down to like actually organizing it with Abe Cambridge. We're going to have a cocktail party, virtual cocktail party on Zoom with Abe Cambridge. And we're going to talk about all sorts of stuff. Think of your questions now. Any questions you have about solar panels, a self-reliance, a decentralized grid, any of that sort of stuff, that's interesting. But we're going to throw you to a film that he provided for us. And the thing that's spooky about this, because remember, we're a Halloween sort of thing right now. So the thing that's so spooky is like, I did not tell him what our headlines were going to be. I did not tell him that we were going to be talking about artificial intelligence. So look how spooky this is that he sent this.
I'm spooked.
There is no spoon. So I don't know if you know this, Max and Stacy, but the Brazilian World Cup was kicked off by a cyborg, a man with a robotic leg being controlled by neuronal implants, kicked off the ball to start off the 2014 World Cup. So as we upgrade our bodies, we can theoretically cure death. There are whole warehouses in the United States filled with frozen bodies and even severed heads, cryogenically frozen so that the owners of that physical flesh can be reformed and revitalized into the future. I mean, we're also mapping neurons, we're trying to model the human brain into computers, we're trying to simulate the human brain. We can theoretically try and attempt to live forever. We're trying to become immortal. But of course, the universe has a time limit. The universe is going to expire, so surely there is no such thing as being able to live forever. Well, actually, there is, because of course, we don't live in a universe, we live in a multiverse. So given that time is infinite, and if it's theoretically possible to simulate a human brain on a computer, then the chances are greater than not that we are actually already living in something like the Matrix. But what does that actually look like, and what could it look like to create a new multiverse? I mean, even if the universe we're living in dies, you can only live forever if you manage to create new multiverses or skip between multiverses. And so if you want to get some insight into what this may appear like, I highly recommend checking out Isaac Asimov's The Last Question, a fantastic short story that goes into how a computer You can utilize all the energy in the entire universe to then kickstart it all over again. It's a fantastic short story. Do check it out. See you next time.
Well, talk about great reset. Boing! That would be cool to just like restart all these multiverses over again.
And the Bitcoin happens every 10 minutes. Essentially, the entire thing is audited and kicked off fresh. And the UTXOs are refreshed, and it's a whole new universe every 10 minutes.
And of course, cryogenically frozen is Hal Finney. So he could come back in the future and reclaim his Bitcoin.
And reclaim his Bitcoin. He'll be the richest man. The world's first trillionaire will be Hal Finney when he comes back, reanimated. And at that moment, he'll remember that he forgot his private key.
Oh, no.
And he'll be like so many who have forgotten their keys. He'll be darn upset.
I have a feeling that Hal Finney's too smart for that. Day of the Dead, you know, this is I guess, a good day to celebrate Hal Finney. You know, all our Mexican followers out there, the Day of the Dead, it was right, like when you go to, it's a day that you go to basically celebrate the dead, all your ancestors, those who came before you, and therefore the cycle of life, who are here. You're here because
like Guillermo
of them.
here. Guillermo
Died
for
our sins
quite some time ago. Isn't that right, Guillermo? That's right, Max. I am actually dead. I celebrate Day of the Dead. I come back and I sing my song and strum my guitar. You know, that Abe Cambridge fellow is quite smart. There is a multiverse. As somebody who's passed over into the multiverse, shedding this mortal coil, I can tell you that he's absolutely correct. And that Isaac Asimov's story is very popular in the multiverse. I just read it again myself, Stacy, and I'm going to write a song about it on my guitar.
Right. And make sure you go to thesunexchange.com/orange pill, because, you know, actually over there at thesunexchange.com/orange pill, they have all sorts of content. You know, you see some good content here, but he actually provides like a weekly Sun Exchange diary and does a load of other interesting videos. So I'm always watching those. Like, he has really quirky, interesting ideas. Like,
but to bring it back to the multiverse, you know, the idea though, and you know, harnessing the brain to the hologram. But if they have these brains that are thoughts are going to the brain to brain, then that kind of is the multiverse. If your entire universe is in the brain, then if you're traveling from brain to brain, you're traveling through the multiverse. And then the only impediment to traveling the multiverse is to just get rid of this idea of ego, of that you have. I think, therefore I am will be proven incorrect by the discovery of the multiverse, by connecting these brains in such a way where thoughts have independent lives. Each thought has its own life. And we know that, you know, memes have their own life, but they say, you can kill me, but you can never kill my idea, right? Ideas are immortal. Ideas go on forever, and ideas travel through brains. And so if you can connect those brains in a way that the self-sustaining, self-animating thoughts can travel through the multiverse of the brainiverse, you know, then we will have a transcendental moment. We will shed our petty connection to the smug industrial complex, and we will join a greater cosmic consciousness. And Bitcoin allows that to happen because it's the monetization of the global consciousness in the multiverse.
That's spooky. And, you know, and speaking of Day of the Dead, like, one thing in terms of these multiverses and the cycles and time and space and stuff, I remember one of the best things I ever learned, and the most interesting, and why it's always good to just like talk to people from other cultures. And I think Orange Pill Telegram group, by the way, like, we have so many people from so many different cultures, but we also try to talk to people from different cultures. A lot of our guests from all over the world, whether Ali Kanani, Nozomi Hayes, or Abe Cambridge. Yeah. And so, you know, when I forget what documentary we were watching, but they were in, I believe it was Peru, and they were talking to some native indigenous people from there. And you know how when we Westerners, we say the past is behind us, right? It's back there. And the future is in front of us. They do it the exact opposite, because you could see the past. The past is all the stuff you can see. You can't see behind you. So that's the future.
Yeah, exactly. That's cool.
That's a wild way of looking at things.
Yeah, it's equally works, you know, that everything you're looking at is in fact the past. because it's the synaptic delay between consciousness and the senses is there's some redundancy there. There's some latency there. There's a
Well,
latency in the human brain and consciousness that therefore whenever you experience through your senses is technically in the past.
well, we could already time travel. So if you look at it, look up at the stars. Most
Right,
of the light
right.
you see coming to you was like it traveled several billion years ago,
From
and
dead
it's finally
stars.
hitting you today.
That's
Like it's because
freaky.
it takes that long for it to journey across that distance. So when you see the twinkle in the sky, that star might not be there anymore, but it was several
Twinkle,
billion years
twinkle,
ago.
little star, where the fuck are you? The end. Hey, you never asked me what my favorite Halloween candy is.
What is it? I just because it's trick or treat, and you were a magician and did all your escape routines from the straitjacket in Times Square. Like I assumed you were always there going out tricking rather than treating. Like you were not interested in the
always,
candy.
I like the treats too.
What was your favorite treat?
Candy corn.
Candy corn.
Yeah, I like candy corn.
I'm gonna have to Google that and provide a definition to the audience because I'm sure
Everyone
that's
in the audience knows what candy
no,
corn is.
I don't think they
Yeah.
do candy corn.
They're
anymore.
shocked right now that you don't know what candy corn is.
I know what candy corn is, but I don't think any millennial or Generation Z know.
I mean, why wouldn't you be a candy corn fan? You only see it at Halloween, right? It's so it's the traditional Halloween candy.
I liked candy corn too, but
Right?
I had totally forgotten about it.
But you can always get a Mars bar or a Milky Way or a peanut butter cup.
That's what I'm saying is like, I remembered peanut butter cup because they still exist. Like, no, I never hear anybody talk about candy corn. I never see an ad for candy corn. I don't, people don't contemplate.
Well, the candy corn people can't buy ads on social media because all them politicians like soaked up all the video time. So the candy corn is being overlooked. But I guarantee you that on trick-or-treating night, there'll be plenty of candy corn flowing in the streets.
Well, this is airing, I believe, on November 1st. So
mark my word.
I bet if you're looking in your little bag, you'll see some candy corn.
Hell yeah. You're going to see some. Don't eat the apples, though. That could be.
And remember, go to thesunexchange.com/orange pill. Register there, log on, sign up. Do that now before we do our cocktail hour with Abe Cambridge here on... Well, we're going to do like a special orange pill. I don't know if I'll film it because a lot of people don't want to be filmed, but we're going to have a cocktail party, a cocktail hour with him. Everybody's going to have some Sats, Margs, and orange pill with Abe Cambridge of thesunexchange.com/orange pill. It's going to be fun. We're going to talk about, come up with all your questions you have about alternative energy. AI, space
Sun
travel.
Exchange is the greatest way to earn sats, in my opinion. You rent solar cells in South Africa. The sun comes in. And it provides energy for the school, the church, the factory, whatever the building is. And part of that energy is turned immediately into Bitcoin and goes directly into your Bitcoin wallet. You're turning sun into Bitcoin the way God intended it. This is God's money to you. Sunlight into your Bitcoin wallet as Satoshis. This is God in your pocket. This is God in your life.
You have to look at the individual projects, but the fact is you don't have to be part of the Smug industrial complex.
No.
You could just they're small scale projects. They're on a school, they're in a vineyard, they're in a old folks home.
Don't be smug.
Don't be smug. They're
be
interesting
smug.
projects. We like the guys there. They provide fantastic content looking at things like we were just saying, artificial intelligence, solar panels,
That's right.
space travel, the future. They're looking at a very orange pilled world. Of course, you should always stack sats first. Like just do that. Stack sats at swanbitcoin.com/Kaiser.
Swan Bitcoin.
And then, as you become part of this whole global consciousness of positive thoughts and a positive future and not being smug, part of the smug industrial
Don't
complex.
be smug.
The projects on the sunexchange.com/orange pill are really interesting and beyond any returns. Like it's just like the projects themselves are really interesting, and you're actually reducing costs for these people in South Africa where the government itself, all these government run utilities are very expensive. Their electricity is very expensive. A lot of the projects cut their costs by up to 30%. And so, like, you're helping out people, part of the Bitcoin community around the world, in Africa in this case.
Don't be smug. Too much smug leads to smegma.
It's worse than smog.
Smog, smegma, and smug. Those are the three horsemen of the fiat money apocalypse. Only Bitcoin can save you from those three. Bye, y'all.
Peace.